Assalamualaikum and hi everyone. Today I will present cybersecurity case review titled Kerajaan Malaysia versus Tan Nyuk 2017. This case was decided by the Court of Appeal in Malaysia on 20 September 2017. The main issue in this case is about a government enforcement raid carried out under the Copyright Act 1987, where officers entered a business premises, seized equipment and conducted an investigation. However, after a long investigation, no criminal charges were brought against the business owners. Because of this, the business owners filed a civil lawsuit claiming that the raid caused them financial loss, damage to reputation and disruption to their business operations. The main objective of this study is to understand how government enforcement actions can affect business operations, especially in situations involving legal investigations. First, this presentation aims to explain the full facts of the case so that we clearly understand what happened step by step from the complaint until the court decision. Second, it aims to identify the industrial relation issues that arise, especially the relationship between government enforcement agencies and business owners who are affected by raids or investigations. Third, it is to analyze whether the research warrant used in this case was legally valid and whether the officers followed the correct legal procedures before conducting the raid. Fourth, it is to evaluate the decision made by the Court of Appeal and understand why the higher court disagreed with the High Court. Fifth, it also aims to study the real impact of enforcement actions on businesses, including financial losses, operational disruption, and reputation damage. And lastly, this study also includes interview questions to understand both perspectives from enforcement officers and business owners, so we can get a balanced view of the issue. Industrial relations is usually defined as the relationship between employers and employees. But in modern understanding, it also includes the role of government agencies because they regulate how business operate. In this case, several important legal and industrial relations principles can be applied. One of the most important is the rule of law, which means that all government actions must follow proper legal procedures and cannot be done randomly or without legal basis. Another important principle is good faith, which means that government officers must act honestly, fairly, and without any intention to abuse their power. There is also the principle of administrative fairness, which requires that any investigation or enforcement action must be reasonable and justified. At the same time, businesses also have rights and they should not suffer unnecessary harm if they are not proven guilty. Therefore, industrial relations is about balancing enforcement power with fairness and protecting business stability while still allowing the government to enforce the law. In this case, the main company involved is Blizzard Entertainment, INC, a company from the United States that owns popular video games such as Warcraft 3, Diablo 2 and StarCraft. Because these games are protected under copyright law, Blizzard appointed a Malaysian company called Sandy Mutiara Multimedia Sendirian Berhad (SMM) to manage and protect its copyright in Malaysia. SMM was given the authority to distribute the games legally and also to take action if there were any cases of copyright infringement. SMM later suspected that an internet cafe called Gen X was using or distributing copyrighted software without permission. Based on this suspicion, SMM submitted a formal complaint to the Malaysian enforcement authorities. This complaint triggered an investigation by the Ministry of Domestic Trade, which eventually led to a raid being conducted at the internet cafe. So, this case started from a private complaint but later became a government enforcement action under Malaysian law. The events in this case started when SMM lodged an official complaint on 26 October 2009, supported by the documents such as surveillance reports, statutory declarations, and authorization letters. After reviewing these documents, enforcement officers applied for search warrant. which was later approved by Magistrate under Section 44 of the Copyright Act 1987 on 17 November 2009. Enforcement officers went to Gen X Internet Cafe in Kuala Lumpur and conducted a raid. During the raid, computers and other equipment were seized because they were believed to contain evidence of copyright infringement. After that, investigation continued for about 1 year and 8 months. However, during this long investigation period, no criminal charges were filed against the business owners. Eventually, all seized items were returned to them. Because of this situation, they suffered losses both financially in terms of reputation, so they filed a civil lawsuit against the government for damages. This case raises several important industrial relation issues. The first issue is the balance between government enforcement power and business rights. While the government has the responsibility to enforce copyright laws, businesses also have the right to operate without unnecessary interruption. The second issue is economic impact, because when equipment is seized during a raid, the business may not be able to operate properly, leading to loss of income. The third issue is reputational damage, because even if a business is not found guilty, the fact that it was raided can make customers lose trust. The fourth issue is fairness in enforcement, where we question whether the officers followed proper procedures and acted reasonably. The fifth issue is accountability, which raises the question of whether the government should be responsible for damages when no prosecution is eventually made. Overall, this case shows that enforcement actions can have serious effects on business even before any court conviction happens. The High Court ruled in favor of the business owners in this case. The judge decided that the research warrant issued by the magistrate should not have been granted because the evidence presented was not strong enough. The court also questioned the reliability of the surveillance report, especially because the person who prepared it did not come to court to testify. The High Court also considered the fact that after a long investigation, no criminal charges were made against the business owners. Because of this, the court felt that the enforcement action was not properly justified and that the business owners suffered unfair losses. As a result, the High Court awarded damages to the plaintiffs, including compensation for financial loss, damage to reputation, and disruption of business operations. However, the Court of Appeal disagreed with the High Court decision and overturned it. The Court of Appeal held that the search warrant was valid because it was based on a proper complaint and supported by the sworn information given to the magistrate. The court also stated that the officers had reasonable cause to believe that an offence might have been committed, so the raid was legally justified. The court further explained that the role of the magistrate was properly carried out when issuing the warrant under Section 44 of the Copyright Act. Importantly, the Court of Appeal also clarified that the absence of prosecution does not mean that the raid was illegal or done in bad faith. The decision to prosecute or not depends on the availability of evidence, and that decision belongs to the public prosecutor. Therefore, the appeal was allowed and the government's action was considered lawful. The main findings in this case show that the enforcement officers acted based on an official complaint that included supporting documents and evidence. The magistrate issued the search warrant legally after being satisfied that there was reasonable suspicion of an offence. The court also found that the officers did not act in bad faith or with malicious intent. Instead, they followed the proper legal procedure under the Copyright Act. Another important finding is that even though no prosecution took place later, it does not automatically make the raid illegal. It only shows that the evidence was not strong enough to continue with a criminal charge, but the initial investigation was still valid and lawful. From my analysis, the Court of Appeal decision is important because it protects the ability of enforcement officers to carry out their duties without fear of legal action. every time a case does not lead to prosecution. If officers are punished for failed prosecution, it may discourage them from enforcing the law effectively. The court also correctly explained that at the investigation stage, officers only need reasonable suspicion, not full proof of guilt. This is important because investigations are meant to find evidence, not confirm guilt from the beginning. Therefore, the decision supports the legal system by allowing authorities to act based on complaint and suspicion, as long as they follow proper procedures and act in good faith. Even though the legal decision is correct, there are still some weaknesses in practice. One major issue is the long duration of the investigation, which lasted around 1 year and 8 months. During this time, the business suffered losses because their equipment was taken away and they could not operate normally. Another issue is reputational damage, because even without a criminal conviction, the public may still assume the business did something wrong. This can affect customer trust and future income. Another problem is that there is no clear compensation system for businesses that are affected by raids but are not charged. Because of this, innocent businesses may still suffer serious economic harm. Therefore, improvements should be made to ensure faster investigations, better transparency, and possible compensation mechanisms. This case is very important in industrial relations because it shows the relationship between government enforcement agencies and private business operators. Businesses need stability and confidence to operate smoothly, while the government needs to enforce laws to protect intellectual property and prevent illegal activities. If enforcement is too aggressive or too slow, it can affect business confidence and economic activity. This case highlights the importance of balance between enforcement and fairness. A strong industrial relations system should protect both sides, meaning the government must act legally and fairly, while businesses must also comply with laws. If we conduct interviews for this study, we will target two groups of respondents. The first group is business owners, and we will ask them how the raid affected their daily operations, how much financial loss they experienced, and how their customers reacted after the incident. We will also ask their opinion on whether the enforcement process was fair. The second group is enforcement officers, and we will ask how they decide when to conduct a raid, what factors they use to establish reasonable suspicion, and what challenges they face during investigation. These questions are important because they help us understand both sides of the situation and create a more balanced and complete study. In conclusion, the Court of Appeal ruled and that the search warrant was valid and the enforcement officers acted within the law. Therefore, the raid was legal. The court also made it clear that the absence of prosecution doesn't mean the enforcement action was wrong. However, this case also shows that even legal enforcement actions can still negatively affect businesses, especially when investigations take a long time. Therefore, the key lesson from this case is that there must be a balance between law enforcement, fairness, and protection of business interests. A good system should ensure that laws are enforced properly without causing unnecessary harm to innocent businesses. And for this presentation, I referred to the case of Kerajaan Malaysia and Anor versus Nyuk 2017, as well as Malaysian legal statutes such as the Copyright Act 1987, Courts of Judicature Act 1964, and Evidence Act 1950. I also referred to the related case law on search warrants and enforcement procedures. Thank you. That's all from me. Assalamualaikum.